Time to bust out the archives. It's This Week in Working Class History. And we begin in 1919 when miners in Butte, Montana went on a strike to protest a dollar per day wage cut. Inspired by the ongoing general strike in Seattle, Washington, the miners formed worker councils and called for other trade unionists to join the picket, which they did. Streetcar workers also joined the labor action, shutting down transportation in the city. After 11 days, the strike was broken by Montana's Governor Sam Stewart, who called up the military to crush it. 9 strikers were reportedly bayoneted by the troops, and Butte would remain under federal military occupation for a year later. Next up, 1937, when this week that year workers emerged victorious from their historic sit down strike at General Motors in Flint, Michigan. The industrial action involved tens of thousands of workers who, instead of picketing outside the building, decided to occupy it, thus preventing GM from bringing in scabs and strike breakers. The strike spread to other GM facilities. They put a massive dent in the company's profits as an estimated 280,000 cars went unbuilt as a result. After 44 days, GM relented and agreed to negotiate with the, at the time, nascent United Auto Workers Union. The company agreed to recognize the union and not discriminate against workers involved in the strike, and also to raise wages. The success of the strike helped turn the UAW into a labor behemoth. Union membership would dramatically increase over the next decade. Moving right along now to 1962, when bagel bakers went on strike in New York City and Nassau County. It involved roughly 300 workers at 36 shops, and it reduced the bagel supply in the city by 85%. Obviously, New Yorkers can't deal with that. So after a month, employers caved and gave in to the demands of the bakers. It was one of several bagel baker strikes in the city during the century. Who would have thought? New York City bagel bakers, a particularly militant bunch. And finally, turning now to 1968 in the Memphis sanitation workers strike. Following the deaths of 2 workers due to unsafe conditions, 1,300 African American sanitation employees went on strike to protest mistreatment, discrimination, in the dangerous workplace environment. The strikers would continue their action into April before the city gave in to their demands. The strike was notable because it was the last labor action that Martin Luther King Jr. involved himself in. He rallied the sanitation workers and gave his I've Been to the Mountaintop speech in front of 25,000 supporters of the strike. The next day, King was shot dead in Memphis at the Lorraine Hotel. To learn more about any of these stories or others that happened, follow This Week in Working Class History on Twitter, subscribe to their Patreon, and listen to the podcast. We'll be back with more next week.